Well, welcome everybody, and good evening. We're really glad you're here. Midweek Ash Wednesday service. We're Baptist, and Ash Wednesday is not something many Baptists participate in. It's something Catholics do, liturgical people do. And yet, we do it at Second because it's a way of going the whole way with Jesus. That's the way I look at Ash Wednesday. That's the way I look at Lent, is going the entire journey with Jesus. For most of my life, I showed up on Easter Sunday and said, wow, he rose from the dead. But I wasn't there when he died. And I hadn't gone the whole journey with him when he was teaching us what it meant to live and die, what it meant to be human. So the season of Lent is meant to help us go the whole way with Jesus, to listen to him all the way to the cross and all the way through the cross, all the way through the empty tomb. We're going to talk about this on Sunday mornings in the next few weeks, or Saturday evening, as the case may be. But we kick it off tonight on Ash Wednesday with a service of introspection and reflection and confession. So I hope that you'll come and worship in that spirit tonight.
I'll be reading from Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 from the New Living Translation. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
One of my favorite poets is a man named Scott Cairns. A few years ago, he published a poem entitled Adventures in New Testament Greek, Metanoia. Metanoia is the Greek word for repentance. This is how the poem ends. The heart's metanoia, repentance, on the other hand, turns without regret, turns not so much away as towards, as if the slow pilgrim has been surprised to find that sin is not so bad as it is a waste of time. Sin is not so bad as it is a waste of time. Now, that's not how I've most often thought about sin. That's not how I've ever thought about sin. I've thought about sin as breaking a moral code, choosing death over life, an outright defiance of God. But Cairn calls sin a waste of time. I sort of get the feeling that Hebrews 12 looks at sin in much the same way. The overriding image here is that of a race, and you get the feeling it's more of a marathon than a sprint. We're surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses. The saints, imperfect and flawed though they may be, are cheering us on, providing us energy when we wonder how we're going to take the next step. And our task is to run with patience and endurance while fixing our eyes upon Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith, the prize and goal, the starting line and finish line. We are all runners here, and this is our race. But before we can run, or at least run well, or run with any endurance, we must lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, the text says. Sin here isn't portrayed as vile. You don't feel like the devil's dripping off the word here. You just feel like sin is in the way. You can't run. Sin is like having your shoelaces untied while you're trying to run a marathon. It's distracting. It's irritating. It's annoying. And it gets worse with every step of the journey. It is a waste of time. And sometimes I wonder if that's a better metaphor for sin than many of the more popular ones we have in our day. And so I can't help but wonder if there are any loose shoestrings in our lives tonight. And I wonder how in this season we might find a way to confess them and tie them up. Maybe it's a good thing. A good thing in your life that has begun to take up too much mental real estate. And there's nothing left for you to think about in your entire existence except for that one good thing. Maybe it's apathy. Over the years, you've just grown numb, and compassion is something alien to you these days. Maybe it's a grudge. Something that happened a long, long time ago, but you held on to it because it gave you a sense of justice and moral high ground. But you held on to it for so long that it grew roots. And it began to hold you as much as you were holding it. It became part of you. It's hard to get rid of something that's become part of you. Maybe it's pure laziness. You spend your life watching other people live theirs. Perhaps it's a mouth out of control, which doesn't know when to speak or when to shut up. Maybe it's cowardice that shivers before the powers of this world because we've forgotten that there is a power greater still. Maybe it's a despair that has lost sight of God's tomorrow, or a pride of time that looks in condescension over all those who've come before us. Maybe it's simple idolatry, in which we've grown to love a person or a thing as if it's God, or as if they're God. And the truth is, when you love something for what it isn't, it becomes impossible to really love it for what it is. Maybe it's idolatry. Maybe we've become so narcissistic that we live our lives as something of a black hole these days, in which everything, and by that I mean everything, is about us. Even faith is about what I get out of it, what it does for me, and what it does for my neighbor, or what it does for the common good and the systems of our world, we could care less about. You know, it's possible to only love that part of your neighbor that looks like you. It's possible to only love the part of our neighbors that looks like us, which isn't loving our neighbors at all. It's just loving ourselves in extension. Maybe narcissism. Maybe we've lost patience in the name of the one who was long-suffering and slow to anger. Or maybe we have too much patience for any suffering that doesn't involve us. Maybe we've said no to too many things. Maybe we've said yes to too many things. Maybe we've forgotten the primary thing we've said yes to in our baptism. When you don't have a center, how do you determine your circumference? Maybe we've allowed our anger, even our righteous anger, to metamorphosize into hatred, or our fear to constrict our faith. Maybe we've shifted our gaze from Jesus to some other goal or prize, some other standard, and in so doing we find ourselves on the wrong path because we were seeking the wrong prize. Maybe, in the end, we've just lost our first love. And that love for God, which once was so warm and robust and vibrant, has now calcified. And it's barely love anymore. There is no limit, y'all, to the ways we can trip over our shoestrings. But in a few minutes, we're going to smear ashes on your foreheads. And we're going to remind you that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. You are a mortal. And even marathons have beginnings and endings. Even marathons don't last forever. Tonight means so many things to us and for us. But surely if it means anything, it means this. You and I do not have forever. We are dust, and to dust one day we shall return. And yet, even though we are frail creatures of dust, we breathe in and breathe out the wondrous breath of life. We do it every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day. We live in a glorious and wondrous and miraculous world. And in the midst of it, we are called to be people of peace and justice and love and goodness and beauty and truth. We are called to a race that has glory in every step if we run with our eyes open. We are called to a splendid and sacred race. But every time we sin, our shoelaces go flopping around, slapping our legs, and sometimes tripping us up so bad we fall on our faces. And we look down at our shoes and have to lace them up, and in looking down at our shoes, we're no longer looking up at the one who is the author and the perfecter of our faith. Maybe that's why confession in general, and Ash Wednesday in particular, aren't meant to be morbid and dark. This is to redeem our time, to be sure we don't waste any more of it. Repentance is a tying of the shoes so that we can run with joy and endurance and exuberance. It removes the need to look down so that we can, perhaps the first time in a long time, look up. It removes the things which waste our time so that we can make the most of however much time our dust gives us. And so, after a few moments of silence, I invite you to come forward in a spirit of introspection and confession. I invite you to come and remember that this ain't no dress rehearsal, that you are ashes, you are dust, and to dust you will return someday. I invite you to come and remember that today you are more than ashes. So much more than ashes. But you don't have forever. And I don't either. So let us not waste our time tying our shoes. Let's lace them up tight and take off. For this is the work to which we're called. And the clock's ticking. On your mark, get set, go.